Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here and talk to you about data governance. So I have been formally developing data governance at the UKHO for over 3 years now. Prior to that, at the Met Office, I handled big data and associated governance issues for 5 years. As a result, I've been operating within the data governance space for far longer than my present role title suggests, and I suspect that many viewers would also be able to credit themselves with much more data governance experience than traditional or conventional job histories usually imply. My journey into data governance was a gradual evolution from starting as an end user of simple data during my early physics and engineering roles in a closed loop environment. That's a laboratory setting with clear start, end, and/or reset points. This evolved via richer data, forming a crucial input into decision-making analyses around weather impacts for sophisticated but well-defined static scenarios, which started to include the need for data governance. The final step was moving upwards to formal data governance within a dynamic and changing ecosystem of complex real-world dependencies and feedback loops, namely the oceans and human activity above and below the waves. And this is dependent upon the physical environment, and so exhibits feedback loops which can affect the environment and consequence, leading to future changes in human decision making and so on. This natural evolution tracked my career development from roles with constrained remits and laboratory settings to ones that included increasing needs to consider human behaviour and misbehaviour around data and technology, which also includes how to practically integrate information and data to support real-world socio-economic decision-making. And this closely mirrors the typical hierarchies of corporations and institutions in terms of the evolution of my experience around data governance, from the end user tactical level of how to do something with data, the middle management operational level of what to do with data, and finally the thought leadership level of why to adopt a certain business strategy for data in the first place. Because in today's information economy, with ever-increasing adoption of artificial intelligence and machine learning, there's an ever-growing need for competency and experience in data governance, whether that be within the marine geospatial domain, cyber technologies, green manufacturing, logistical supply chains, or retail customer sales patterns. One crucial characteristic is a healthy skepticism and the drive to improve ineffective practices, especially where they've become entrenched as tradition, convention, or the way it's always been done here. I like to counter such perceptions within organisations, particularly those that genuinely want to evolve, with the view that if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always gotten. Long-term existing practices evolved in the past to meet some requirement at that time in that environment and may have once satisfied the need very effectively, but the problem is stagnation while the market and competitors have moved forwards. Another important trait is avoiding unwanted change for its own sake. It's the mirror opposite of static tradition or convention, but this time as the modern trend of continuous disruptive change without strategy. This type of burn it all down or wrecking ball approach to data governance misses out that many long-term practices could still be effective, and that change needs to be incremental. It needs to be integrated and monitored, not only with corporate structures, but also human behaviour, means, motivation, and opportunity, which is often the true critical factor. Adapting, changing, modifying, and repurposing established policies or existing processes can help preserve change capital for those changes that are genuinely novel or necessarily disruptive. It can also mitigate frictions with those who are invested in existing practices, such as their users, instigators, designers, and owners, instead bringing them on board and engaging them with repurposing and updating. The third characteristics in a triangle of ideal traits with the other two is to have a keen applied interest in human behaviour around the use and misuse of data and information. Traditional or conventional hard governance centers around the assumption that people only make the wrong decisions because they have the wrong information or not enough of the right information. Hence, the traditional view of data governance coalesces into hard compliance measures and management surveillance. And this includes formal audits, regular in-depth reporting, restrictive checklists, and a focus on top-down, non-negotiable command and control. This approach was suited to traditional mass manufacturing of standardized products in the past, but is insufficient by itself for modern data services that are digital first by design and characterized by near real-time changes within end-user expectations and the environment. So soft governance works with the grain of human behavior and achieves better results by enablement and empowerment rather than by command and control alone. Principles take precedence over prescription, and this allows organizations to leverage the deep insights and frontline experiences of their entire workforce. Shortcut thinking, lack of active engagement, and wrong assumptions are some of the key targets when you use a soft governance approach, but which always still needs the ultimate backstop of hard governance, but this time meaningfully targeted and monitored using a risk-based approach. So combining the two approaches of soft and hard governance can yield outsized and transformative results. Finally, some supporting characteristics to boost the big three that I've mentioned include being able to transcend organizational hierarchies, stovepipes, or functional silos. It's crucial not to bury data governance within your data, digital, or technology domain, but to reach out, persuade, influence, and engage much wider field, especially with customer-facing or revenue-generating areas. The mission is to demonstrate that data governance is not merely a cost center to meet a required need at a minimum level, which is a traditional, outdated viewpoint, but is a key investment as an external, marketable strength that can grow business opportunities. Governmental, private, and industry users of digital information services are increasingly keen to partner only with trusted providers whose governance they have evidenced confidence in for the assured data and services they consume. When starting a journey within data governance, the main problem with resources is the sheer proliferation of information. The key step for any aspiring learner is to self-govern their own reading by always keeping in mind that bigger picture data governance is commonly confused or conflated with the technical details of data management. Although these fields are clearly interdependent and overlap to some extent, this conflation can happen even within respectable publications, so critical thinking is needed by those starting out in data governance. I have 3 recommended books for building a firm foundation in data governance, but should always be supplemented by the insights and experience from whichever sector the reader is operating within. And my second and third recommendations might be surprising to those expecting technical tomes or lengthy technical textbooks. They are both inspiring reads and essential prompts for thinking differently about data governance that can help unlock progress that isn't held back by outdated assumptions, mainly that people are automatons of a sort and behave in entirely predictable, logical ways around information. So, non-invasive data governance, the path of least resistance and greatest success by Robert Siner is my first recommendation. And it's a compact, accessible book when compared to more formal textbooks, which can be intimidating or hard to apply for some. It's got clear language, memorable quotes, and helpful graphics. And I think the book gives an excellent grounding in modern data governance, emphasizing the value in a low resistance approach by repurposing or reusing existing corporate structures, artifacts, processes. My second recommendation is Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow by Professor Daniel Kahneman, and he's renowned within his field with regards to underlying research into behavioral psychology that earned him the 2002 Nobel Prize in Economics. he showed the existence of cognitive biases within people's behaviour. Cognitive biases are systematic deviations from rational behaviour that might have served humanity in the past. That's, thinking fast, shortcuts, but now can interfere with rational decision-making in the modern world, thinking slow or deliberately. Confirmation bias is one of the best known examples, but there are many more that can exert their influence, even over professionals and experts. These can all cause real-world effects, including injury and loss of life, especially in safety-critical outlier situations under real time pressure and uncertainty. It's a relatively long and engaging read, but each chapter is self-contained to an extent, with excellent opening quotes and memorable takeaways to encourage recall. My third and final recommendation is Inside the Nudge Unit by Professor David Halpern, and it's an excellent follow-on from the previous suggestion of thinking fast, thinking slow. However, this time showing the application of behavioural governance within a real-world governmental setting. Professor Halpern is the CEO of the Behavioural Insights team that was instituted in 2010 by the UK Cabinet Office to directly support government efforts to create outsized effects of relatively small changes of the right type. By giving case studies and real-world examples of their outcomes, I think this book can inspire readers to begin thinking about what nudges they can instigate to encourage their existing data practitioners to become active and engaged data citizens. This is needed for modern data governance, as risk-adverse hard governance is akin to the law that commands people what to do or not to do under specified circumstances. But it can't detail every possible set of circumstances and doesn't inform about how to go above and beyond to create a data community which exploits opportunity, new circumstances, and requires risk-informed value judgments. And this is ideally achieved by soft governance to empower those on the front line with their wealth of both experience and insight via principles and guidelines, always with the backstop of traditional hard governance to formally manage the most common and significant risks. The biggest challenge I've encountered is the institutionalization of hard governance as the sole way to carry out effective data governance, where data governance is only seen as a cost center with a need to have minimally acceptable governance at the lowest possible outlay, normally for meeting auditing needs or an externally imposed requirement. And this naturally focuses upon documented checks and balances, rigid procedures, detailed checklists, all supplemented by top-down command and control that's enabled by management surveillance. But this can be overcome by explaining that modern and holistic data governance places soft governance as a first step, which seeks to unlock both the experience and expertise of frontline data practitioners by getting them involved and engaged with data governance via principles or best practice or other channels for bottom-up governance. Gaining traction with the wider workforce takes patience and consistent effort, as they're naturally suspicious that data governance represents yet more traditional hard measures and controls upon them. By giving them quick wins, by simplifying or removing outdated procedures that currently hold them back the most, it can help develop trust and the momentum that's needed for more involved changes later. I like to think of such an approach as stockpiling a notional resource of change capital, one that's built by trust, common understanding, open conversation, and evidence of success. Change capital is a perishable resource that can be wasted, expended, it fades over time. So investing it wisely in further change efforts that can grow it can lead to accumulating an exponential data governance benefits, a bit like compound interest. Another challenge associated with the practice of traditional hard governance is the neglect that different communities of internal stakeholders have different measures of data governance value. Drawing upon my analogy of change capital, it's as if these different communities, from frontline data practitioners to strategic leaders, are using different currencies when they measure the value of data governance activities. So it's crucial to be aware of and to accommodate such differences to balance the change capital between them. As an example, without sufficient traction with data practitioners, any attempted change won't be sustainable or be undertaken to rule with the least possible compliance. On the other hand, lack of traction with strategic leaders will result in under-resourcing, lack of management support, and limited room to maneuver around any deeper changes. The ideal solution I've implemented a few times is to encourage a common vocabulary around data governance, which can speak value to as many different stakeholder communities as possible, including externally, using and explaining terms like soft governance with hard governance and support to show how data governance as a whole can unlock and retain workforce talent, whilst also being able to show market partners the quality of internal data governance can be an efficient way of leveraging data governance changes as a marketable strength and not just our internal cost center of old. I've always had an affinity for the geospatial ever since completing my doctorate in remote sensing while at BAE Systems Avionics and Heriot-Watt University. It was a natural shift to considering weather impacts on military operations during my half-decade at the UK Met Office, with a limited side dabble in space weather. My current role at the UK Hydrographic Office is to embed best practice and modern data governance as the next step in a career chain from data creator to data analysis on its impacts, and then finally to its governance within an organization or an enterprise. My current focus is in developing the data governance model needed for a MSDI, which is a marine spatial data infrastructure. My goal is to help bring together all my past insights via a vision for an inclusive socio-economic ecosystem of marine geospatial information. Someday I would like to progress to the grand vision of an NSDI, a national spatial data infrastructure, and its governance to unify the domains of air, land, sea, space, and cyberspace into a single coherent ecosystem of policies, peoples, processes, technologies, ethical best practice, and socio-economic outcomes that leaves no community behind. The most important piece of advice I would give relates to professional strengths to make oneself and the practice of data governance indispensable to any enterprise. There was an article in Harvard Business Review in October 2011 on leadership development under the title Making Yourself Indispensable, which was a key milestone in my own professional development. Although it's important to improve upon weaknesses, the necessary step of further developing a personal strength is much less clear to many. Increasing how much of something you do that you're already good at will only yield incremental improvements. So beyond a certain point, being even more of a technical expert usually won't transform someone into an outstanding leader. The authors of that article suggest that non-linear development, using the analogy of athletic cross-training, can yield exponential results greater than the sum of its parts. One example that they gave was developing the capability to explain technical problems both more broadly and more effectively, that when coupled with existing technical expertise can work together even more than alone. Some leaders of major big tech companies exemplify this characteristic as an example. Overall, it's not enough to be a pure specialist in data governance, but the skill set needed to persuade and influence different stakeholder communities, along with the ability to demonstrate interdependency and common interests between them via the common language of data governance, is paramount. It's crucial for longer-term career progression. Sometimes effective changes around existing practices that personally connect with people daily can be much more than just policies, procedures, technology, or even data and information. Many years ago, an organization I worked for ran a change and innovation scheme that invited submissions for changes which might make a large improvement over enough time or repeated instances. That organisation had a cafeteria with glass doors and closers to keep them shut normally, but which always seemed to result in drop lunch trays and spilled soup on a regular basis. The owners of the chain scheme were probably expecting a selection of technical and business submissions, but the one that got the most votes was to permanently keep the cafeteria doors open, thus leading to no more stained shirts and soup puddles on the floor. The moral of the story is not to prejudge the changes that can make a real daily difference, but to embrace them, support them, and show that no suggestions are too small or trivial. When transforming the practice of data governance at an enterprise, insights via frontline data practitioners is crucial throughout the process. So one of the key tasks of a data governance team is to cultivate data governance innovators at the front line, not just the innovations themselves. If you lose an innovator because they felt that their suggested changes were trivialized, then you lose all the insights that they would potentially share in future, or even worse, the innovator themselves to another business that will value their lived experience and insights. So the message is that data governance must include the people element and the improvements that they can bring to any data governance journey for an organization or enterprise. Thank you. It's been great having the opportunity to talk about my experiences in data governance.